Have you ever felt like you didn't have very much to offer to God, like you only had a little something? I know I have many times. Today we're going to look at the miracle that was recorded in Matthew 14 of the feeding of the 5,000, and let's let Jesus teach us on little is much when God is in it. Hi, and welcome to Take 5. My name is Lanita, Seay, and today's devotional topic is on little is much when God is in it. If you'll go with me to Matthew 14, we're going to start in verse 13. And what had just happened was the disciples had come up to Jesus and told him that they had just buried John the Baptist, that he had been killed. And we'll pick up in 13. When Jesus heard what had happened, he withdrew by boat privately to a solitary place. Hearing of this, the crowds followed him on foot from the towns. When Jesus landed and saw a large crowd, he had compassion on them and healed them. As evening approached, the disciples came to him and said, "This is a remote place and it's already getting late. Send the crowds away so they can go to the villages and buy themselves some food." But Jesus replied, "They do not need to go away. You give them something to eat." "But we only have 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish," they answered. "Bring them here to me," he said, and he directed the people to sit down on the grass. Taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish and looking up to heaven, he gave thanks and he broke the loaves. Then he gave them to the disciples, and the disciples gave them to the people. They all ate and were satisfied, and the disciples picked up 12 basketfuls of broken pieces that were left over. The number of those that ate was about 5,000, besides men and besides women. Now, what I love about this is that Jesus, whenever he had heard the news about John the Baptist, he had gone off in a boat. The scriptures don't say whether or not he went off to grieve, whether he was going off to rest or just to be by himself and rested. It didn't say. But what it did say was that he saw the large crowd of people and he had compassion on them. What Jesus did was that he set aside his own agenda, his own plan, and he took this opportunity to minister to the people, to the crowd of people, and also to take this opportunity to teach the disciples a very valuable lesson that we ourselves can learn today. The part I love the most in these scriptures is when the disciples realized that Jesus was not going to send the crowds away hungry. Instead, he turns to the disciples and he says, "They do not need to go away. You give them something to eat." Now, I can just imagine the reaction that was on the disciples' faces, because that's probably would be the exact same reaction that I had on my face. I would look at Jesus and say, But Jesus, I only have 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. How is this possible? I only have a little bit to offer to the crowd." But Jesus, he then takes this opportunity to teach them. The first thing that Jesus told the disciples was, "Here, give me the loaves and give me the fish." Have you ever felt like you didn't have much to offer to God? I know I have many times, but Jesus wants us to acknowledge whether we have a little or we have much, that number one, it comes from Him. And so he wants us to give it back to him. And many times I've prayed to God and I said, "God, I don't have very much, but what I do have, I give it to you. I choose to give it to you, and I ask you to use it for your glory." And I'm thinking that that's exactly what Jesus was trying to teach the disciples at that very moment. Whatever you do have, give it to me and let me do something with it. The second thing is, after he took the loaves of bread and the 2 fish, he looked up to heaven and he thanked God for it. Now, many times I'm guilty of complaining when I feel like I don't have very much, of complaining and saying, "God, I don't have very much. Can you give me more?" Instead of thanking him for what I do have, because in reality, I have so much more than what other people do, and I need to have a grateful heart. So Jesus was teaching the disciples, acknowledge me, give it to me, and thank me for it. And then the third thing that Jesus did was that he gave the fish and the loaves of bread back to the disciples and said, "Now here, you feed the people." And the disciples were probably thinking, but it's the same little bit that I just gave to you. You just gave it back to me, and it's still little. But see, now, no, it's not little anymore, because remember, we acknowledged that it came from God. We gave it back to Him, and we thanked Him for it. So now, instead of it being little, it's mighty, because God is in it. What was little to begin with is now big. And so the fourth thing was that as the disciples handed the loaves of bread and the fish out to the 5,000 people, it kept multiplying and multiplying and multiplying, so much that they had 12 basketfuls of food left over. 12 to 5,000 people. It was 5,000 men, plus women, plus children. Now we can't say that when we give our little over to God that He cannot do something mighty and powerful with it. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John all record this miracle of the feeding of the 5,000 and the 12 basketfuls of food that's left over. We should use every bit of what He's given to us, whether it's little or much, for His glory. God can even use those leftovers. Now, what are you going to do with your little? I hope you've been blessed and encouraged by today's devotional, and I would love to hear from you. Please email me at take5tuesday@gmail.com. Until next week, God bless you, and don't forget, take 5.